Welcome back to Called Bank Sports. It's been last game against the Suns. Like I don't know if we want to dig into it too much, but I think we can pull some things that we learned about the Jazz. And honestly, it was a rough loss. The Jazz were up by 17. They blew the lead, but I just wanted to point out that not everything's negative that we can pull from this game. So we're right towards the end of the season. The Jazz have a game left. Most teams have a game left. A few have two left. And it's looking increasingly likely that the Jazz will hold on to the 5 seed, which doesn't really mean anything at this point. 5 or 6 doesn't matter, except for who do you want to play in the first round.
I mean, there are some implications down in the second round in the Western Conference Finals, but right now, not necessarily a big point of discussion for Jazz fans. I don't know how many are.
When you're lower than the 4 seed, you're just hoping to get out of the first round. So you can't play those games of we want to avoid the Suns as long as possible. Which if the Jazz have a road to the finals, it will be through the Suns at some point. Which that's not what I'm betting on at this point. But so it's looking more and more likely that the Jazz will hold on to that 5 seed, and it's looking more and more likely that they won't play the Mavericks, but they'll play the Warriors in the first round. So I think it's like really interesting to look into both of them. The Mavericks have much less star power, but they're on a hot streak. The Warriors have been beat up. Klay Thompson's kind of been trying to get back into his rhythm. Steph Curry's not been playing the last few games, but do you really want to play Steph Curry or Klay Thompson in a playoff series? So I don't know. I guess we can start off with what do you think about that series? If the Jazz do, because I think we've talked about the Mavericks series, if that ended up happening. Let's talk a little bit more about the Warriors real quick.
Yeah.
What do you see in that series? What did the Jazz need to do to get out of that series?
The big question in my mind is how healthy is Steph Curry? We know the plan is for Steph to play, but is it like when Donovan Mitchell played last season where his ankle never really got back to 100% and eventually he ended up tweaking it again and that really hurt the Jazz? Is that something that could happen to the Warriors? I definitely think the Jazz could beat the Warriors. I'd actually probably, just because of all of the drama around the Warriors and the lack of them having a hot streak, I think I would rather play the Warriors in the sense that I think the Jazz have a better chance of beating them than they do the Mavericks. But again, Draymond Green, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson are just all great players. They're elite players, and the Jazz are going to have to beat them. I do think that the Jazz were not in a great position against the Warriors when they blew the big fourth quarter lead about a week ago. They didn't have Hassan Whiteside, so it was just Rudy Gobert having to play a lot of those center minutes and probably playing more than he should have. So it's going to be interesting, and we're going to get into it. We're going to talk a bit more about this episode, how the Jazz just pretty much need everything to go their way to be able to win and to win the title. And is that going to really happen for enough games for them to get there? Probably not. But I really just am at the point where it's all that matters is the playoffs, and I will judge the Jazz after they lose in the playoffs. I'm trying to just take a deep breath and wait until then before I make any long-lasting decisions about the team.
Yeah, and with that, I think because the Jazz haven't been playing their best basketball this season recently, just a lot of things haven't been going their way. And like you said, we'll kind of get into some numbers that are showing the Jazz have had a tough time with adversity. But I think one glimmer of hope, and it's kind of been their downfall, is that I think the Jazz are a better team than their record shows. And my reasoning for that is the Jazz have been up by a lot of points in a lot of games, and they blew those leads.
Yeah.
So I don't think blowing a lead, that's not a sign of you not being talented because you got that lead in the first place. So the Jazz are good enough to get an early start, have an awesome lead. And so what it comes down to from there is just how well do they work together as a team? And we've seen them work together great as teams earlier this season, even. We've seen it last season. And so I think it's something that they have, and it's something that they just haven't been doing. So if that's my glimmer of hope for the Jazz is if they can get it together, work as a team, play team defense down the stretch, play their team offense, not have the whole offense go through Donovan Mitchell, then I think they have a chance to, when they get that 17-point lead in the playoffs, hold on to it and win. And so I think that's the one thing, that's a one glimmer of hope. It's been frustrating to watch them get the leads and lose them, but I think they have the ability, if they fix whatever issues are going on, whether that's a locker room issue, an injury issue, whatever it is, I think they have what it takes to hold on to those leads.
Yeah. And I think that if we were both betting on it, that we're not expecting that to happen. We're not expecting the Jazz to all of a sudden have everything click and become the best team in the league and win the title. But it is possible, which is why I'm at least just like waiting to see what happens in the first round, waiting to see if the Jazz, with some time off, are able to take a deep breath, prepare for their opponent, and have more success. I mean, like, you look at it, the Jazz are the best offense in the league this year. They have the best offensive rating at 116.3. The second best team is the Atlanta Hawks at 115.1. So obviously Atlanta's had a rough season, and so have Utah.
That's a pretty good gap between first and second, though.
No, it is a pretty big gap. It is a pretty big gap. I cannot talk today. The middle of the league, when you get down to Toronto at 15 and San Antonio at 16, Toronto has an offensive rating of 112.3 and San Antonio 112. So the Jazz are about 4 points above the kind of league average teams right now, or the league median teams, I guess is the right way to word that. Then when you get to defensive rating, it is kind of concerning. The Jazz have fallen all the way down to 12 with a defensive rating of 110.4. So that's not exactly where you want to be, and the defense does definitely need to pick up. But overall, like, they're a capable team. They're a very talented team, like you said, who do have the ability to make waves in the playoffs and to go on a run. They definitely haven't set themselves up for success there with the struggles that they've had the second half of the season. Pretty much the struggles they've had since January, when everyone got COVID, and it feels like they've never really come back from it.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about the Warriors. We talked about those struggles. Before we started recording, Nate and I were looking at stats. There's this cool website. It shows a lot of different stats based off of who has the disadvantage. So obviously there's the common stats of things like, are you the favorite going into the game? Is it home court or is it an away game? And one of the things that we were looking at specifically were rest. About, like, if you had a rest advantage, I don't know exactly how they calculate that. I'm assuming if you just had a day of rest or more than the other team going into this. And I don't know how they factor travel into it, but
yeah.
So the Jazz, percentage-wise, are the best team in the league when they have a rest advantage, but they've only had 16 of those games.
Yeah, and I've got that pulled up on the screen right now. So, and they're 15-1, which is incredible. Like, it shows that when things are going right for the Jazz, when they have the advantage, that they're probably going to win those games. And Phoenix is definitely right up there with them. And you can see at 22-3, like, Phoenix has done a really good job of winning those games with the rest advantage. And that's one of the reasons why they're the top team in the league right now.
Yeah, and what we notice, though, is, like, if we look at the games that you have, and we can have this whole conversation about scheduling and how this impacts that, but the teams when they don't have the rest advantage, we see the elite teams like Phoenix are winning those games at a high rate, not as high as with rest advantage, but over, like, almost 74%, which,
yeah,
if that's your win percentage all year, that's a really good team. You're normally a first or second seed. So, but
then you come down all the way to Utah, who are 8-12 without a rest advantage. With rest disadvantage, and are just not doing well at all. And that just really kind of starts to show where that's not the worst record in the world. Like, if they're still winning other games, they can deal with that. But where Utah really has just struggled with any semblance of adversity this season and hasn't been able to win the hard games.
And even when we look at when the Jazz have when it's like equal rest going into it, they're only 25-20 going in like with those games. So it shows like here's what I'm taking away from that is that the Jazz, when things are going their way, they are an elite team. They're very good, and like there's not many teams that can beat them. When there's something that is off, whether that being a key player is injured, them not having as much rest, they need some sort of advantage outside of the court to win games. And that's what they've shown us so far this season. And so that's a little bit concerning because going into the playoffs, they're not going to have home court advantage in any series unless there's a bunch of upsets in the first round.
That would be awesome. No, you're totally right. The Jazz aren't going to have that home court advantage. And that's something that, appears to be something that should be really valuable to them based just kind of off of these trends that we've glanced at, right? And now, to be fair, we look at a team like Boston, where Boston, I really think, has a really good chance of making the finals. They have been on an absolute tear. It's a team that for the last couple of years, people have been talking about, hey, this isn't working. We need to break them up. They can't get past that. They can't get past the hump. And all of a sudden, it looks like Boston's going to be very capable of that, right? So things could click for Utah. They have the talent there. They feel a lot like Boston kind of pre-All-Star break to me, where you're just really disappointed in everything and don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And do I think there will be changes this offseason if the Jazz don't go on an absolute run in the playoffs? Yeah, I think there's going to be some major changes. I don't know what those are going to be, but I think that with Danny Ainge in the front office, and just with kind of the disappointment the last 3-4 years, that something will change. But if they do wait, I could see the Jazz all of a sudden being successful next year and having things click again. But I do think making changes this offseason, if the playoffs don't go well, is probably the right move for Utah.
And I think the fan base would demand changes if it's like a gentleman's sweep and the Jazz are out in the first round, something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we don't know a ton about how Ryan Smith operates things. This front office is a little bit new. So maybe they're not swayed at all by fan pressure. So we'll kind of see what happens. But that's kind of, we're going to find out in the next few days how the playoffs will end up. The play-ins start. I don't know when they start. I have not been paying attention. I don't care about any of the teams in the play-in tournament. But we'll figure that out in the next week or so. Let us know, down in the comments, one, what your thoughts are about the Jazz. I know they've not been great. Do you think they're going to win in the first round, move on to the second round? And two, if they don't, what kind of changes are you looking for the Jazz to make? What changes do you think they will make, and what changes do you want them to make? I'm kind of curious to hear that feedback from everyone who listened this far to the video, which probably isn't many of you.
Hey, well, thank you for everyone who has. We really appreciate it. We'll get another video out next week, kind of with a bit of a playoff preview towards the end of the week. So thank you guys so much. We just really appreciate all of your support, and go Jazz.